7 times, Victoria Harlan told Nathan Cole no, and on the 7th time, she made sure his little girl heard it clearly enough to remember the sound of her father being dismissed. The lobby of Harlan Freight Systems was built to make small men feel smaller. 40-foot glass walls caught the morning sun and threw it across polished marble floors where every shoe step sounded too loud. A chrome model of a long-haul tractor sat inside a glass case near the reception desk, angled under white lights like it belonged in a museum instead of a trucking company. On the wall behind it, a digital map of the United States glowed with blue routes, green delivery windows, and moving dots that represented hundreds of trucks crossing interstates, mountain passes, border towns, ports, warehouses, and distribution yards. Nathan stood beneath that map in a faded denim work jacket with road salt dried along the hem and diesel still caught under his fingernails. In his left hand was a thin manila folder. In his right was the small red toy truck his daughter had dropped when the receptionist called his name. Ellie Cole was 7 years old, sitting on the edge of a white leather chair that looked too expensive to touch, her knees together, her backpack at her feet, watching her father the way children watch adults when they know something unfair is happening but do not yet have the language to name it. Nathan had told her to bring her math worksheet. He had told her this would only take 10 minutes. He had not told her it was the 7th time he had walked into this building trying to convince the most powerful trucking CEO in the region that a small carrier could solve problems her larger partners kept creating. Victoria Harlan came out of the executive elevator at 8:17 with Grant Mercer half a step behind her, already looking at his watch as if Nathan had borrowed time he had no right to touch. Victoria was 39, tall, controlled, dressed in a charcoal suit that made every other color in the lobby seem accidental. She did not offer her hand. She glanced at the folder, then at Nathan's jacket, then passed him toward the parking lot where 3 older trucks with Cole route services printed on their doors sat near the curb. One had mismatched panels. One had a cracked passenger mirror taped at the edge until Owen Briggs could replace it properly. The reefer trailer behind the third had a faded logo from a grocery chain that had gone bankrupt 9 years earlier. Victoria looked at them for 3 seconds and understood nothing. "Mr. Cole," she said, "we move medical inventory, manufacturing parts, refrigerated freight, and emergency contracts across 12 states. We do not put 7-figure accounts into the hands of a single dad with 3 tired trucks and a handwritten route book." Grant let out a soft laugh through his nose, not loud enough to be called rude, just loud enough to be heard. Nathan did not look at him. He opened the folder anyway and placed 1 page on the reception counter. "Your Northwest cold chain lane has failed 4 times this quarter," he said quietly. "Not because of trucks. Because your backup route crosses the same weather system as your primary." Victoria's expression did not change, but Grant's did. Only a flicker. Nathan saw it. He had spent too many years reading dispatch rooms, driver voices, late invoices, and the tiny pauses people made when a fact landed where they did not want it. Victoria slid the page back without reading the second half. "We appreciate your persistence," she said, and the word persistence sounded like something unpleasant tracked across her clean floor. "But this is the final answer. Harlan Freight does not need coal route services." Behind Nathan, Ellie stopped swinging her feet. The little red toy truck rested on the counter between them, bright and plastic and suddenly embarrassing in a room full of chrome and glass. Nathan picked it up, wiped a speck of dust from its roof with his thumb, and handed it back to his daughter. He did not argue. He did not remind Victoria that this was the 7th no. He did not tell Grant that old trucks still moved when expensive systems froze. He only nodded once, gathered the folder, and walked Ellie toward the revolving doors while the digital map kept glowing above them like a promise no one in that building knew was already breaking. 6 months later, every blue route on that wall would turn red before midnight, every carrier Victoria trusted would stop answering fast enough, and the only fleet still moving through the ice, the closed-way stations, the county roads, and the last 12 miles nobody planned for would have Nathan Cole's name painted on the doors. Nathan did not speak until they reached the truck. Ellie climbed into the passenger seat of the old white Freightliner cab because she liked sitting high enough to see over ordinary cars, and Nathan stood outside for a moment with one hand on the open door, looking back at the Harlan Freight building through the cold morning glare. The glass made the place look weightless from a distance, as if the company floated above the city instead of depending on roads, fuel, drivers, weather, loading docks, coffee, patience, and men who knew how to keep a machine alive when a dashboard warning light stopped being helpful. Ellie buckled herself in and held the red toy truck in both hands. "Dad," she said, "are they mad at us?" Nathan looked at her then, and something in his face softened without becoming weak. "No," he said. "They just do not know us." That was all he gave her, because Nathan Cole had learned years ago that children did not need every adult disappointment explained in full. They needed steadiness. They needed lunch packed before school. They needed the heat paid in February and a hand on their shoulder when the world made too much noise. He started the truck, waited for the diesel idle to settle, and pulled away from the curb without looking back again. By 9:30, Ellie was at school with her worksheet folded inside her purple folder, and Nathan was in the garage behind the rented house on Wexler Road, standing over a map of 3 counties with a pencil behind his ear. The garage was not impressive. The concrete floor had dark oil ghosts that no cleaner would ever remove. The roll-up door shook when the wind came out of the west. A small electric heater worked harder than it should have near the workbench, where unpaid invoices, route permits, and Ellie's spelling list shared the same chipped surface. But Nathan moved through that place with the calm precision of a man who saw more than clutter. He saw time. He saw miles. He saw which warehouse closed its south gate 15 minutes early when the afternoon supervisor was on shift. He saw where the interstate backed up after the first freezing rain because city crews always salted the overpass too late. He saw which rural clinic needed insulin deliveries before sunrise and which food distributor lied about unloading times to hide its own staffing problems. He had not always owned trucks. For 7 years, he had worked as a dispatcher and route analyst for Midvale Transport, a mid-sized carrier with enough business to matter and enough problems to teach a careful man everything. Nathan was not the loudest voice in the dispatch room. He did not slap desks or curse at drivers through a headset. He listened. He could hear fatigue in a driver's answer before the driver admitted it. He could tell from a 30-second pause whether a warehouse had lost a pallet, whether a reefer unit was drifting warm, whether a storm cell was going to close a pass before the weather alert said so. Managers called him cautious. Drivers called him accurate. There was a difference, and Nathan knew it. Then Rebecca got sick after the accident on Route 19, and everything that had once felt permanent rearranged itself around hospital chairs, insurance calls, and a little girl who kept asking why her mother's hands were so cold. Rebecca died in early October, when Ellie was 5. Nathan stayed at Midvale for 3 more months, trying to make night shifts, school drop-off, medical bills, grief, and a child's nightmares fit into the same 24 hours. They did not fit. So he left the dispatch room, bought the first truck with what remained of their savings, and started taking the freight larger carriers did not want because it was too small, too late, too rural, too inconvenient, or too hard to explain to software. People thought he was stepping down. Nathan knew he was stepping closer to the road itself. On the wall above his workbench, beside the calendar from the local parts store, he had pinned the 7 rejection notices from Harlan Freight. Under each one was not anger, not profanity, not a promise to prove anyone wrong. Under each one was a note written in pencil. Northwest Lane shares storm exposure with primary. Backup cold storage too far from interstate. Vendor scoring ignores local bypass roads. Driver turnover high near Route 6 corridor. No secondary carrier within 40 miles of Mercer County hub. To most people, those pages were humiliation. To Nathan, they were measurements. That afternoon, while Ellie sat at the workbench coloring between vocabulary words, Nathan drew a thin red line across the county map and circled a forgotten road that ran behind an old rail depot, 12 miles shorter than the official detour and almost never used by commercial carriers. Ellie looked up from her paper. Is that for the lady in the tall building? Nathan kept his pencil on the map. Not anymore, he said. Outside, one of his 3 tired trucks ticked as it cooled in the driveway. Inside, the first real shape of something larger had begun to appear. Victoria Harlan did not build her company by being careless. That was the part people outside Harlan Freight Systems often misunderstood. It was easier to call her cold than to admit she was disciplined, easier to call her arrogant than to study the years of pressure that had shaped her into someone who trusted numbers more than voices. Her father had started the company with 11 trucks, a borrowed yard, and a handshake contract with a paper mill outside Dayton. Victoria inherited none of the romance of that story. By the time she took control, the business was already large enough to break under its own weight if someone did not become harder than the problems inside it. She became that person. She cut routes that did not pay. She sold equipment that looked impressive but ran inefficiently. She replaced friendly managers with operators who understood margins, penalties, cold chain compliance, and the brutal cost of one missed delivery window. In 12 years, she turned Harlan Freight into a regional force with 900 trucks, 3 major distribution yards, and contracts that moved medical inventory, electronics components, precision parts, and refrigerated food across 12 states. In business magazines, they called her exacting. In driver lounges, they called her something less polite. Both versions carried pieces of the truth. Victoria did not think of herself as cruel. She thought of herself as responsible for thousands of moving parts, and in her world, sentiment was not a strategy. Every morning at 7, she stood in the operations room on the 31st floor and looked at the LED route wall as if it were a living thing. Blue meant active. Green meant on schedule. Yellow meant manageable. Red meant money leaving the building faster than anyone could stop it. Grant Mercer usually stood at her right shoulder with a tablet in his hand and the expression of a man who believed every problem could be solved by removing the person who pointed it out. Grant was 46, polished, narrow-eyed, and deeply invested in making himself necessary. He had joined Harlan Freight 5 years earlier after leaving a national carrier under circumstances that were never discussed clearly. He spoke in phrases that sounded intelligent in conference rooms. Vendor risk profile. Asset concentration. Operational discipline. Scalable partner architecture. Victoria valued him because he delivered clean reports and reduced noise. She had not yet understood that clean reports were sometimes made by sweeping important dirt under expensive carpet. Grant hated small carriers. Not openly, not in a way that sounded emotional. He hated them in policy language. He said they lacked redundancy. He said they increased insurance exposure. He said owner-operators were unpredictable, undercapitalized, and impossible to standardize. In meetings, he would tap one finger against the vendor scorecard and say, "Small carriers create large problems." The board liked that sentence. It sounded prudent. It sounded protective. It also protected Grant from the one thing he could not control, which was a man outside the system who knew the roads better than the system did. Nathan Cole's name had appeared on Grant's desk 7 times in 14 months. The first application was rejected automatically because Cole Route Services had fewer than 10 trucks. The second was marked incomplete because Nathan refused to exaggerate his equipment capacity. The third reached Grant through a warehouse manager who said Nathan had delivered a temperature-sensitive load through a county closure when 2 larger carriers had turned around. Grant deleted the recommendation after reading the first paragraph. By the 4th attempt, he remembered the name. By the 5th, he had decided it was an irritation. By the 6th, he had changed the vendor test requirements 2 hours before Nathan arrived, adding a fleet-size threshold Nathan could not meet. By the 7th, Victoria herself had seen enough to dismiss him in the lobby. That afternoon, Grant summarized the encounter in the executive report with one sentence. Non-scalable carrier seeking access beyond capacity. Victoria read it, initialed the margin, and moved on to a meeting about the Northwest cold chain lane. The meeting lasted 28 minutes. Nobody mentioned that the lane had failed 4 times that quarter. Nobody mentioned that each failure happened under the same weather pattern. Nobody mentioned the handwritten note Nathan had placed on the reception counter before Victoria slid it back. Instead, the screen showed percentages, projected recovery windows, and a green indicator beside the words vendor network stable. Victoria looked at the green light and believed it. 30 miles away, in a garage with a shaking roll-up door and a space heater glowing orange beneath a scarred workbench, Nathan was looking at the same problem without the comfort of a green light. He had no boardroom, no chrome model trucks, no polished language to make risk look smaller. He had a road atlas, a pencil, 3 tired trucks, and a daughter asleep in the next room with a red toy truck on her pillow. The danger inside Harlan Freight was not that Victoria Harlan was foolish. She was not. The danger was that she had built a perfect machine, and everyone around her had become too proud of it to hear the small sounds it made when it started to crack. The 7 rejections were not identical. That was why Nathan kept them. If they had all said the same thing, he might have folded them into a drawer and let them become part of the ordinary disappointment that collects around people trying to build something with too little money and too much responsibility. But each rejection carried a different shape, a different weakness, a different small admission from a company that believed it was revealing nothing. The first had arrived by email at 6:12 on a Tuesday morning while Nathan was packing Ellie's lunch. Thank you for your interest. Minimum fleet requirement not met. Ellie had been standing on a chair beside the counter, pressing a plastic lid onto a container of grapes, and Nathan had read the message twice before sliding his phone into his pocket. He did not sigh. He wrote fleet threshold excludes local recovery capacity on a yellow note and pinned it beneath the printed email that night. The second rejection came through the front desk after he spent 3 hours in the Harlan lobby with a folder on his knees and rain drying on his jacket. A receptionist with a practiced smile told him the vendor review team was no longer available. Through the glass wall behind her, Nathan saw a route coordinator arguing quietly into a headset about a refrigerated trailer stuck outside Mercer County with no driver close enough to swap in. Nathan went home and wrote Mercer County has no live backup within 40 miles. The third rejection was a 4-minute phone call with Grant Mercer, who never asked one question about Nathan's on-time record, temperature logs, driver hours, or route maps. Grant only asked how many trucks he owned, how many trailers he could stage, and whether he had capacity to absorb a multi-state surge. Nathan answered honestly. Grant ended the call with the polished disappointment of a man closing a file he had never opened. Nathan wrote capacity measured by equipment, not completion. The fourth happened at the South Distribution Yard, where Nathan had been invited by a warehouse supervisor named Carla Ruiz after he delivered an emergency pharmacy load through a county road closure that had stranded 2 larger carriers. Carla had watched him back the reefer trailer into a narrow dock with 6 inches to spare and said Harlan should use men who could think under pressure. Grant arrived before the paperwork was finished, looked at Nathan's truck, and said the company could not put its brand beside equipment that looked like it belonged behind a feed store. Nathan looked at the truck, then at the freight still holding temperature inside it, and said nothing. That night he wrote Surface Standards outrank freight outcome. The fifth rejection was quieter. A cold chain lane out of Northwest Ohio was awarded to a national carrier with newer trucks, better brochures, and a sales team that used the word resilience 3 times in the same presentation. 2 weeks later, that carrier missed a rural clinic delivery because its routing software refused to approve a county bypass that every local driver knew was passable. Nathan heard about it from Owen Briggs, whose cousin worked maintenance at the clinic. He pinned the notice and wrote software ignores local knowledge. The sixth was the one that told him Grant was no longer dismissing him by accident. Nathan had been scheduled for a vendor simulation at 9 in the morning. At 6:48, a revised checklist arrived. New requirements. 10 active tractors. 5 standby reefers. Multi-yard staging capacity. Nathan read it at the kitchen table while Ellie ate cereal in her pajamas. She asked if the paper was bad news. He said, "It is just information." He still drove to Harlan Freight. He still completed the parts of the test they allowed him to complete. He still noticed that one simulated route failure could have been solved by a two-lane road that was not listed on their map. That night, under the sixth rejection, he wrote criteria changed to protect conclusion. The seventh was the lobby, the marble floor, Victoria's calm voice, Grant's small laugh, and Ellie going still in the white leather chair. That was the only rejection Nathan did not mark right away. He brought Ellie home, made grilled cheese, checked her homework, read 8 pages from the book she liked, and waited until she was asleep. Then he went back to the garage, took out the seventh notice, and pinned it at eye level. For a long while, he stood there with the pencil in his hand. Finally, beneath Victoria's name, he wrote one sentence. They do not know what they depend on. Outside, the wind moved against the roll-up door. Inside, the 7 no's hung in a straight line above the workbench, not as insults, not as wounds, but as a map of a company too certain to see the road beneath its own wheels. The first truck Nathan bought after the 7th rejection had been sitting behind a grain elevator outside Findlay for almost 2 years. It was a 2009 Freightliner with white paint faded to the color of old chalk, a driver's seat split along the left edge, and an engine that turned over like it was remembering a language it had not spoken in a long time. The owner wanted $6,000 for it because the odometer had stopped at 812,000 miles and the passenger side fairing was missing. Nathan offered $4,700 in cash, not because he enjoyed bargaining, but because $4,700 left enough money for school shoes, a rebuilt alternator, and 3 weeks of groceries if no invoice paid late. Owen Briggs stood beside him in a brown canvas jacket, chewing a toothpick and listening to the idle with his head tilted slightly. Owen was 62, broad in the hands, slow in the knees, and able to hear a diesel problem the way some people heard a wrong note on a piano. "She is tired," Owen said. Nathan looked at the truck, then at the thin blue smoke drifting from the stack. "Tired is not dead." Owen smiled at that, "Not much, just enough." They brought the Freightliner home that afternoon at 48 miles per hour with the hazards on and a toolbox wedged behind the seat to stop it from sliding every time the brakes complained. Ellie was waiting in the driveway when they pulled in, her backpack still on, the red toy truck clutched in one hand. She stared at the Freightliner as if her father had brought home something enormous and alive. "Is that ours?" she asked. Nathan climbed down from the cab and rested one hand on the door. "If we can keep it running." Ellie walked around the truck slowly, studying the mismatched panels, the scratched bumper, the faded company numbers someone had tried and failed to remove. She stopped by the front tire and looked up at the grill. "It needs a name." Owen took the toothpick from his mouth. "All working trucks need one." Ellie thought for a long time, the serious way she thought about things that mattered. Then she said, "Red June," even though the truck was not red. Nathan looked at her. June had been Rebecca's birth month. Neither of them said that out loud. Owen looked away first, pretending to inspect the tire tread. By sundown, Ellie had taped a small red paper star inside the cab near the dash, and Nathan let it stay there. The second piece of the fleet came 3 weeks later, a refrigerated trailer with a failing cooling unit and the ghost of a grocery chain logo along the side. Bigger carriers had passed on it because the compressor cycled unevenly and the door seals leaked in 2 corners. Nathan crawled inside with a flashlight, closed the doors behind him, and sat for 6 minutes in the cold silence, listening. When he came out, Owen was waiting with his arms folded. "Well?" Nathan said, "Air is escaping at the hinge side, not the latch side. Unit is working harder than it has to." Owen grunted. "That is cheaper than a dead compressor. It took 4 nights to fix." Nathan worked after Ellie fell asleep, laying out salvaged parts on a towel, cleaning contacts with the patience of a surgeon, replacing seals by hand because paying someone else would have emptied the fuel account. Sometimes Ellie came into the garage in her pajamas and sat wrapped in Rebecca's old sweatshirt on a folding chair, too sleepy to talk but unwilling to be far from the light under the roll-up door. Nathan never told her to go back inside right away. He would finish the bolt he was turning, walk her back to bed, tuck the blanket under her chin, and return to the trailer without complaint. The third truck was a box truck from a plumbing supplier that had upgraded its fleet for tax reasons and did not care what happened to the old one. The brakes needed work, the lift gate groaned, and the interior smelled faintly of copper pipe and wet cardboard. Nathan bought it anyway. Not for distance. For the last mile. For clinic deliveries. For small factories that could not fill a full trailer but could not afford to wait. In town, people noticed. Trucks were hard to hide. At the gas station, a man in a clean pickup asked Owen if Nathan was starting a junkyard with license plates. Owen only looked at him and said, "Maybe." Grant Mercer noticed too, because Grant made it his habit to notice anything that might someday embarrass a report he had signed. A yard supervisor forwarded him a photo of Nathan's 3 vehicles lined up outside the garage, the Freightliner with its tired paint, the old reefer trailer, and the box truck with primer on one door. Grant looked at the photo during a break between meetings and laughed once. A fleet of scrap metal, he said to no one in particular. Then he deleted the message. That was his mistake. Trucks did not have to look expensive to arrive on time. Doors did not have to shine to close against the cold. A man did not need 900 units to understand the 12 miles everyone else kept missing. By the end of that month, Coal Route Services had 3 vehicles, 1 repaired trailer, a whiteboard full of narrow routes, and a little red paper star taped inside the cab of the first truck. It was not an empire. Not yet. But at 4:30 every morning, when the engine started in the dark and the garage lights came on before the rest of Wexler Road had stirred, the thing everyone had laughed at began to move. Nathan did not hire drivers the way larger companies hired drivers. He did not begin with recruitment ads, signing bonuses, or polished language about opportunity. He began with names he already trusted, the people who had been treated like problems by companies that needed them until the moment they became inconvenient. The first was Marcus Bell, a 48-year-old former Army logistics sergeant who had been pushed out of a national carrier after refusing to drive past his legal hours during a holiday surge. His file said difficult. Nathan read it and heard disciplined. Marcus showed up at the garage before sunrise wearing a clean black cap, carrying a thermos, and asking 3 questions about the route, the load temperature, and the backup plan. Nathan handed him the keys. To Red June for a pharmacy run into rural Indiana. Marcus returned 17 minutes early with the temperature log clean to the decimal and the fuel receipt clipped to the paperwork in perfect order. The second was Paula Denton, a single mother from Marion who drove nights because her sister could watch her boys after school but not before it. A larger carrier had called her availability complicated. Nathan called it honest. He gave her the box truck first, then the reefer routes once she proved she could back into a clinic dock at 3 in the morning without waking half the neighborhood. The third was Earl Whitaker, 66, gray-haired, slow with smartphones, and capable of naming every county road within 100 miles by the diner or grain silo that sat near it. Harlan Freight's kind of system would have marked Earl as outdated. Nathan put him beside the route map and watched him correct 3 software-approved detours with a pencil before finishing his coffee. By the end of the second month, the garage wall no longer held only rejection letters and maps. It held driver names, school pickup times, medical appointments, preferred truck setups, birthdays, fuel cards, and emergency contacts written in Nathan's careful block letters. Ellie drew small stars beside each name because she said trucks needed people and people needed stars. Nathan let those stay too. He built the schedule around the truth instead of pretending the truth was inefficient. Paula could not take Tuesday mornings because her youngest had therapy. Marcus would take winter routes through the hills but would not accept a load without a written rest plan. Earl hated the interstate after dark but could find county bypasses that did not exist in routing software until Nathan added them by hand. Owen watched it all from the workbench, rebuilding a spare reefer control board with reading glasses low on his nose. "You know the big companies would call this messy," he said one evening. Nathan was tightening a bracket under the box truck lift gate. The big companies lose good people because they want clean charts. Owen looked at the wall, at the names, at Ellie's stars, at the map thick with red and black pencil lines. This is not clean. Nathan slid out from under the lift gate and wiped his hands on a rag. No, he said. It works. That became the shape of coal route services. Not large. Not glamorous. Accurate. Nathan took the routes nobody wanted and made them boring, which in freight was another word for valuable. A midnight insulin delivery to a clinic outside Van Wert. A 6-pallet machine parts run to a factory that could lose an entire shift if the line stayed down until morning. A refrigerated bakery supply load that had to cross 2 counties during a thunderstorm because a larger carrier delayed pickup for a fuller trailer. Nathan did not promise miracles. He promised arrival windows he had measured himself, with fuel stops, driver rest, school zones, weather patterns, and unloading habits included. He answered the phone at 2 in the morning because he knew what it felt like to need help after everyone professional had stopped sounding available. Drivers answered him for the same reason. He paid every invoice he owed before he paid himself. Some weeks that meant his dinner came from toast, peanut butter, and coffee while Ellie ate chicken, rice, and sliced apples at the kitchen table. He never mentioned that to her. Children notice sacrifice more deeply when adults try to hide it, but Ellie was kind enough not to say so. She only began leaving half her apple slices on his plate and pretending she was full. By the 3rd month, dispatchers at small warehouses knew his number without looking it up. By the 4th, regional clinics started asking whether coal route services could be listed as first call backup. By the 5th, even drivers from larger carriers had heard about the little garage on Wexler Road where the coffee was bad, the trucks were old, and nobody was asked to risk his license or his life to make a manager's spreadsheet look better. Nathan did not build the biggest fleet in Ohio. He built the fleet that arrived when every larger answer came with an excuse. And across town, on the 31st floor of Harlan Freight Systems, Victoria Harlan's map still showed green. The storm did not look dangerous on the first forecast. It arrived as a pale blue band across the northern edge of the weather map, the kind of winter system people in Ohio learn to respect without fearing. Light freezing rain by evening. Possible ice accumulation overnight. Reduced visibility in rural areas. Harlan Freight's software absorbed the alert, adjusted estimated arrival windows by 12 minutes, and left most of the route wall green. At 7 that morning, Victoria stood in the operations room with a paper cup of black coffee cooling in her hand while Grant Mercer briefed the senior team. He called it a manageable weather event. He said their national carrier partners had capacity. He said the Northwest cold chain lane had redundancy. He used that word twice, and no one challenged him. Victoria looked at the LED wall and saw blue routes, green delivery windows, and only a few yellow warnings blinking near the interstate corridor. It was the kind of picture a company believed because it had paid millions of dollars to see its own confidence displayed in color. By noon, the first freezing rain started tapping against the windows of the 31st floor. By 2, a tractor-trailer jackknifed near an overpass outside Fort Wayne, blocking the eastbound lane long enough for traffic to back up 8 miles. By 3:15, one of Harlan's major carrier partners delayed 12 refrigerated loads, not cancelled, delayed, which was the word people used when they wanted failure to sound temporary. By 4:20, the backup carrier refused 2 medical supply runs because every approved route crossed the same storm path as the primary. In the operations room, one green line turned yellow, then another, then 4 more in a row. Grant stood at the center table with his tablet and said the system was recalculating. Victoria said nothing. She watched the map the way a person watches a machine that has always worked begin to make a sound it should not make. At 5:42, the first route turned red. It was a refrigerated pharmaceutical load due at a regional hospital network before midnight. The penalty was not just money. The product had a narrow temperature range and a narrower delivery window. At 6:10 a. Manufacturing client called because a shipment of precision bearings had not left the crossdock, and without them, a night shift of 180 workers would stand beside silent machines. At 6:38, a food distributor reported that 2 trailers were staged in the wrong yard because the routing software had assigned a transfer point that was already iced over. The room changed after that. People stopped speaking in complete sentences. Phones rang and were answered with names, locations, apologies, and revised estimates that nobody trusted. Coffee went cold. Jackets came off. A junior coordinator cried silently at her station and kept typing because no one had time to comfort her properly. Victoria moved from screen to screen, asking short questions and accepting shorter answers. Who is covering Mercer County? No one answered fast enough. Where is the secondary reefer capacity? Grant tapped his tablet. Still pending confirmation. That means no. He looked up. It means not yet. Victoria set her coffee cup down on the table. She did not pick it up again. Outside, the glass reflected nothing now but the white blur of ice and streetlights. By 8 o'clock, Harlan Freight still had 900 trucks in its system, but many were in the wrong places, several were waiting on drivers out of hours, and too many depended on interstates that were becoming parking lots 1 mile at a time. The expensive map no longer looked like a living thing. It looked wounded. Red spread across the northwest lane, across the cold chain backups, across the small towns Grant's reports had treated as secondary because secondary places only mattered when freight was trapped inside them. Victoria turned toward him slowly. You told me this lane had redundancy. Grant's face remained controlled, but the hand holding his tablet tightened. It does under normal disruption conditions. Victoria looked back at the wall. This is Ohio in winter. Normal disruption conditions should have included ice. No one spoke after that. 30 miles away, Nathan Cole stood in a garage on Wexler Road with his sleeves rolled to his elbows, a weather radio murmuring beside the workbench, and the county map already marked in red pencil. Ellie was asleep in the office under his old jacket, her red toy truck tucked near her hand. Marcus Bell was fueling Red June. Paula Denton was checking temperature seals on the reefer. Earl Whitaker was pointing at a county road most dispatch systems ignored because it cut behind the rail depot and ran 12 miles shorter than the official detour. Nathan listened to the rain strike the metal roof, then looked at the board where 6 small loads had become 9, then 12. He did not smile. He did not celebrate anyone else's trouble. He only picked up the phone when it rang again and said, Coal Route Services. The first customer to say the name was not trying to embarrass anyone. He was simply tired, cold, and out of patience. His call came into the Harlan operations room at 8:26 that night from a hospital purchasing director in Toledo who had spent the last hour listening to revised estimates that kept moving later instead of closer. Victoria took the call herself because the account was too important to pass down the table. She stood beside the LED wall with one hand against the edge of the console and listened while the man on the other end spoke in the flat voice of someone who had already lost confidence. Your primary load is still 70 miles out, he said, but Coal Route Services delivered the emergency split shipment 16 minutes ago. Victoria did not answer immediately. Grant looked up from his tablet. The coordinator nearest the wall stopped typing for half a second, then started again more quietly. Repeat that carrier name, Victoria said. The man did. Coal Route Services. It entered the room like a small sound in a large machine, easy to miss, impossible to remove once heard. Victoria wrote the name on a legal pad though she already knew it. Nathan Cole's folder, the marble lobby, the red toy truck on the counter, the 3 old vehicles near the curb. The memory did not arrive dramatically. It arrived with the precision of a receipt. At 8:39, a second call came from a manufacturing client outside Lima. Their bearings had arrived through a rural transfer point Harlan's software had marked low priority. The carrier name on the delivery receipt was Coal Route Services. At 8:51, a clinic network reported that 2 temperature-controlled totes had been delivered by a driver named Paula Denton, with logs clean and signatures complete. At 9:07, a food distributor whose load had been stranded near an iced-over yard called not to complain, but to ask whether Harlan could route future emergency overflow through the same small carrier that had just saved their cold storage window. Nobody laughed. Nobody said scrap metal. Nobody said non-scalable. The operations room began processing the truth at different speeds. The junior coordinator found coal route services in an old vendor file. Rejected. 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 7 entries, each marked with a reason that looked professional until placed beside the map bleeding red across half the wall. Minimum fleet requirement not met. Insufficient scale. Equipment presentation below preferred standard. Revised simulation criteria incomplete. Not aligned with strategic vendor architecture. Victoria read each line without blinking. Grant stepped closer, his voice low. They are handling small overflow. It is not comparable to our network. A phone rang behind him. Someone answered, listened, then turned toward Victoria. Ma'am, regional lab account says coal just cleared their delayed pickup through Hancock County. They want confirmation that we approved the handoff. The room went quiet again, deeper this time. Victoria looked at Grant. He looked at the tablet as if the right phrase might still be hiding there. There was no phrase for this. The smallest carrier on the rejected vendor list was no longer outside the system asking to be let in. It was underneath the system, catching what fell through. 30 miles away, Nathan's garage had become something larger than its walls. The heater glowed orange. The weather radio crackled. The whiteboard was crowded with names, times, road numbers, fuel stops, delivery windows, and short notes written in black marker. Marcus had cleared the pharmacy route and was moving toward a machine parts transfer in red June, the paper star. Still taped inside the cab. Paula was on the radio from County Road 18, calm as ever, telling Nathan the reefer temperature was holding at 37 degrees and the bridge approach was slick but passable. Earl had already corrected 2 detours before the county updated its own alert. Owen stood at the workbench with a flashlight in his mouth, repairing a connector on the spare control board because the night was not done asking for things. Nathan did not raise his voice. He moved from map to phone to radio to invoice sheet with the same quiet attention he had once brought into dispatch rooms where nobody noticed the man preventing disasters because disasters did not happen when he was doing his job well. Ellie slept through most of it in the office, curled beneath his old jacket, one cheek pressed against the armrest, the red toy truck on the floor where it had slipped from her hand. At 9:24, Nathan's phone lit up with a number he recognized only because he had dialed it 7 times before. Harlan Freight Systems. He let it ring twice, not out of pride, but because Paula was speaking over the radio and her route mattered first. Say again on mile marker, he said, pencil ready above the map. The phone kept ringing against the scarred wood of the workbench. In the Harlan operations room, Victoria listened to the line tone and understood, with a stillness that settled through her shoulders, that the first time she truly needed Nathan Cole, she was the one waiting. Victoria did not call from her private office. She called from the operations room, standing under the red light of a failing route map with 23 people close enough to hear what humility sounded like when it finally entered a room built for authority. The line clicked, and for 1 second there was only weather static in the background, the low murmur of a radio, and the distant idle of diesel engines. Then Nathan's voice came through, quiet and even. Coal route services. Victoria held the phone tighter than she meant to. Mr. Cole, this is Victoria Harlan. Across the table, Grant looked down at his tablet. Several coordinators stopped pretending not to listen. Nathan did not answer right away. In his garage, Paula's route marker was still under his pencil, Marcus was waiting for fuel clearance, and Earl had just radioed that the county road behind the rail depot was open but icing fast near the bend. Nathan looked through the office window at Ellie asleep under his jacket, then back at the map. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The politeness was clean. That made it worse. Victoria had been spoken to with anger before. Anger gave a person something to resist. Nathan gave her nothing but steadiness. "We have multiple critical shipments delayed across the Northwest Lane," she said. "Medical, refrigerated food, manufacturing parts. Our primary and secondary carriers are locked behind interstate closures, and we need emergency assistance." Grant shifted beside her. He looked as if he wanted to interrupt but could not find a safe place to enter the sentence. Nathan picked up a second pencil and marked Earl's position near County Road 14. "How many loads?" Victoria glanced at the screen. 32 routes that need movement within 18 hours. There was a pause. Not dramatic. Practical. The pause of a man doing math faster than he spoke. Temperature controlled. 14. Hazardous materials. No live unloads. Victoria looked at a coordinator, who raised 4 fingers. 4 confirmed, possibly 6. Nathan wrote it down. Owen Briggs looked up from the workbench, the flashlight still in one hand. Marcus, standing near the open garage door with his cap pulled low, watched Nathan's face and understood from the stillness there that the night had just changed size. "I cannot take 32, Nathan said. Grant exhaled softly, almost relieved. Victoria closed her eyes for half a second. "What can you take?" "I can move 12 before sunrise if your docs release clean paperwork in the next 20 minutes. I can stage 6 more by noon if your warehouse managers stop rerouting freight after it is already assigned. I can coordinate local handoffs for the rest, but not under Harlan's standard rate, and not under your driver hold policies." Grant finally spoke. "Mr. Cole, this is an emergency event. We would expect cooperation from any regional carrier. Seeking future partnership." Nathan's eyes did not leave the map. "Mr. Mercer, I sought partnership 7 times. Tonight you are seeking capacity." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. In the operations room, one of the coordinators looked down at her keyboard. Another stopped typing entirely. Victoria turned slowly toward Grant, and for the first time that night, he had no prepared language that sounded larger than the truth. Nathan continued. "My drivers run legal hours. My invoices are paid on delivery for emergency freight. My temperature logs stay with my company. I will not put my people on unsafe roads to repair a planning failure." Victoria heard the sentence as clearly as if he had placed it on the table in front of her. My people. Not assets. Not capacity. People. She looked at the red map and saw, for the first time, how much of her company had been built on words that made human limits easier to ignore. "Understood," she said. Grant stared at her. "Victoria." She did not look at him. "Send Mr. Cole the load list." Nathan heard the shift in her voice, small but real. "Not surrender. Recognition. Have your team include actual dock contact numbers," he said. "Not general lines. Not office extensions. People with keys." A coordinator was already typing. Victoria nodded once, though Nathan could not see it. "You will have them. And, Ms. Harlan," Nathan said. The room held still. "Do not send me anything marked green if the road is already red." Victoria looked up at the wall where the map had finally stopped pretending. "I will not." When the call ended, Nathan placed the phone face down on the workbench and stood quietly for 2 seconds. Then he moved. He assigned Marcus to the hospital split load, Paula to the clinic network and frozen bakery supply run, Earl to the machine parts transfer through the rail depot road. Owen took the spare control board out to the reefer trailer without being asked. Ellie stirred in the office but did not wake. Outside, freezing rain tapped against the metal roof. Inside, the small garage on Wexler Road became the place Harlan Freight's night depended on, not because Nathan had waited for revenge, but because he had spent 6 months building the answer while no one powerful enough to need it had bothered to look.